able to put it together and consistently play like that throughout an entire game as you get later on in the season. That's what you're hoping for, because that's the main thing when you got freshmen. You're going to see flashes like that, but it's not really going to be overly consistent because they're still young, because they make mistakes, they get down on themselves. It's a different level of competition. But if Caleb Love can hit some of those types of shots, gain a little bit more confidence, I'm telling you, there is definitely a lot of talent there, and he can be a big part of this team going forward. Overall, I mean, there's just a lot of really good stuff that you can take out of this league. This was, like you mentioned, a game where you got down early. You could have let this team sort of run away from you. You even could have done the same thing that you did in the game against Iowa, where you got yourself back into the game, but then still let them find a way to get what was a crucial game for them. If they would have won that game, they're probably, feeling pretty confident about where they're at. They're going into an SEC schedule that's not going to be all that difficult. Now, they lack any sort of resume going into the SEC portion of their schedule. So they're going to have to get everything, put everything that they have into the SEC, probably win most of their SEC conference games to have a chance to get in. So for Carolina, this was just a really great job to fight from word go, get yourself back into this game, and continue what has been, again, not the greatest season in Carolina history, but a season where you're fighting back, even though you may not have the experience that you would normally like to.
Yeah, you can tell that we're pretty animated about this game because the language in this podcast has been free flowing with some cuss words, which normally isn't on here, and I'm about to take it to another level. If we have any young listeners, I do apologize, but Armando Bacot's quote after the win over Kentucky has to be put out there because I really think it emphasizes the mindset of where Carolina is because, we try not to reference a lot about what happened last year, which was just a really hard year, but it's hard to forget it because we're only 1 year removed. And this team is still – a lot of these guys went through it last year. And Armando Bacot was quoted saying after the game, "We made bad shots and have yet to put together two halves of basketball. We went down early. They figured they would punk us, but this is not last year. We're not going to have any of that shit. Excuse my language, but we are not." And I think that's between Carolina. Is last year, if they would have gotten down 11, they would have gotten blown out. That game would have been over probably at halftime. This year's team, and I think Roy really emphasized it in the postgame. And there was a game last year where Carolina beat Oregon in the Battle for Atlanta. So I thought that team was a tough basketball team. They proved not to be. Roy Williams thinks his team is getting tough, and they're getting tougher. And, toughness isn't being strong, and it isn't, it's diving on the floor for loose balls. It's getting box outs and getting timely rebounds. That's something that Carolina did in the second half. In the first half, they couldn't keep Kentucky off the glass. They did a better job of that in the second half. And so you're seeing what I've told you is going to happen from day one. Carolina is evolving from game to game, from week to week. And they're not the best team they're going to be right now as they're going to be, next week or the week after that. This will be a team that when they get to March, that's when they'll be at their best, which is when you need to be at their best. We don't want them to peak right now. Last year, Carolina peaked at the Battle for Atlantis. That's the highest they ever got. This year's team, there's just hope. We're hoping is going to climb up the mountain every week, every game, and that's what they appear to do. And another thing, before we move on to a different topic, you and I put a lot of stock into watching Roy Williams on the sideline as a coach. I thought he had one of his best games on the animated on Saturday because he got pretty pissed off at him early, and he just started sitting there. And then in the second half, when his team decided they were going to play, then he got up and he started coaching. Whereas John Calipari, from the minute the ball was tipped, was already complaining at the officials, already yelling at his kids. And I think that's reflective. I think that's why Kentucky's kids respond the way they did and why our kids respond the way they did, because they're not being berated. They're not getting yelled at. He let them figure it out. And once they figured it out, they showed themselves, we can play. They can play at a high level, even though they're really young. I thought that bucket by Puff Johnson was really huge at that moment for Carolina. And it's something that I didn't think was in his arsenal. So, look, is Kentucky good? No, they're not. But for Carolina, this was a big win. And I think it's everything coming out of the locker room from that win really, emphasizes that. So with that, move on to a topic before we get to the NC State preview, and we're just going to talk about really our takeaways from the non-conference season as a whole, mainly just because of how short it was, because you only played 7 games. And, where do you think Carolina stands right now as they get ready for ACC play? Are you confident this team can compete to finish in the top 3 in the ACC, which all 3 of us that have been on this podcast, me, you, and Mark Krings, all think they will finish in the top 3 in the Atlantic Coast Conference?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting spot heading in. I feel pretty confident in it. I'm going to be honest with you, though. I think you've seen this team grow from the start of the year. You're seeing other guys that, weren't really big-time contributors out of the gate start to contribute. But again, I mean, it comes back to, the concerns over the lack of delivery shooting, which we knew would probably still be a little bit of an issue. But at the same time, I still think that it's, definitely something they've got to get figured out at some point. Turnovers at times still an issue. Young team, though, we knew that was going to happen. And, the free throw shooting, can they find a way to consistently hold on? And, again, you don't have to be perfect. They've got, a lot of big guys that play big roles. They go to the foul line often. And we've learned, look, these guys are not the greatest shooters. They're guys that if they go to the line, make 1 or 2 consistently, you should just be able to live with that. But the big thing is are you going to be able to iron those things out enough to be able to win these games against some of the top teams in the ACC? You look at this ACC right now. This is not a normal ACC. Virginia, not nearly as good as they've been in years past. I still think they're a very good basketball team. I think they're probably still the favorite in a lot of people's minds to win the ACC. Duke, another team, very similar to what we're seeing from Kentucky. Very young, team that you can tell hasn't really been able to sort of get the cohesiveness that they are used to being able to get during the summer by going through a normal camp and everything like that. And for them, they made the decision to not play any more out-of-conference games after their second loss out-of-conference. Interesting decision, because you would think that playing more out-of-conference games against some of these, even if it's against some of these lower-tier cupcake teams that, Duke seems to play every year, it would, it could potentially help, would allow you to build yourself up. They opted not to do that, so they're going to come in a very weird place where you just really don't know what they are. And, I mean, outside, Carolina, who else is there that's really all that great? I mean, we've seen Virginia Tech jump up there at one point. That was really based on one win against Villanova. I don't think that team's really all that great. I think they're good. They're building towards something. I think Mike Young is a heck of a head coach. But I still don't think that they're a team that you should be overly worried about in the ACC. Got to admit to myself and to everybody on the podcast, haven't seen a whole bunch of Louisville, so we don't really know what they are.
Yeah, they lost by 40 at Wisconsin on Saturday. They're not legitimate ACC contenders at the moment.
Wisconsin's a good basketball team, but that is right. I remember seeing that. They got absolutely destroyed on the road at Wisconsin. That's the thing. You just really don't know a whole lot about the ACC as a whole. So even though you're sitting here thinking to yourself, okay, this Carolina team in a normal year probably would be middle of the road in the ACC, maybe finish 5th or 6th. Is there anybody else that we're really pounding the door down for in the ACC? I mean, the one that just came to me now that maybe some people might think is a good basketball team, but I don't really think it's looked all that great this year either, is Florida State. I mean, there's no answers in the ACC. So you have to go in somewhat confident because everybody's got question marks. You feel like Carolina has, probably the first, second best pure talent in the ACC. So, I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But I definitely feel, a lot more confident than I did a year ago going to the ACC to say that. And I don't know. I guess I am probably a little bit more confident than I was even after, the first game of the season this year in this team. So we'll just have to wait and see. I think the schedule stacks up relatively well for them out of the gate. I know they've got to go, first four of the first six ACC games on the road, but it's against opponents that you should be able to beat. I think we'll have a pretty decent feel about this team probably after the first half of that stretch. I think the first three games of the ACC season will kind of show you where Carolina stands.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think, because the ACC hasn't lived up to the hype we thought going into the year. We thought the conference was going to have a bounce-back season, but you're seeing issues with Virginia, issues with Duke, Florida State, as you mentioned. It still leaves the door for Carolina to get into that top three in the ACC, which is what we all kind of thought was the ceiling. And that's where, you finished the win over Kentucky thinking they can still get to that point, which is a big deal. They got to turn the ball over less. Yes. They got to make perimeter shots better. Yes. So they got to make free throws. Yes. But they're still the best rebound team in the country. And the reason why I think this team is going to be competitive at a high level in this conference moving forward is this is a very good defensive basketball team from what we've seen. And, you can look at what happened at Iowa. Iowa's got one of the best offensives in the country, the way they play around Luka Garza and their perimeter shooters. Outside of that game, this team has competed at the defensive end, unlike a team we've ever seen with Roy Williams as the head coach, because this has been a more offensive-oriented program under his tenure. And I think that's why they can get to they can win games and get to new heights in a new way, because these young guys are committed to playing defense both individually, and they play really, really good team defense, which has been really fun to watch. I think, if they're going to take the next step, you need more out of Caleb Love. But I think you're getting glimpses of him putting it together slowly. He hasn't put it all together as quickly as we thought he could or as we wanted him to. But look, what Kobe White did was special. That's why he went to the NBA after 1 year, because he put it all together as a freshman. And that's why he's going to be a force in the NBA. We've seen Cole Anthony in his NBA preseason. He didn't fit Carolina, but we knew he was always going to be better in the NBA anyway. And you're seeing that now. Caleb Love is going to be a really good professional basketball player one day, and he's going to be a really good college player one day. We just don't know when it's going to happen. I think another thing, you're going to get Anthony Harris back at some point. What does that do to the dynamic of either your starting lineup or your bench production? So I think Carolina's got the pieces. They're putting it all together. You're seeing the rotation kind of tighten a little bit with certain guys. And so I think, you're starting to see what this team is going to be pretty soon. And so with that, let's move into the ACC opener as they all head to Raleigh, play NC State. Originally scheduled to be played at 9 o'clock tomorrow night on ESPN. It's now moved to 7 due to another cancellation within the conference. So it'll be a 7 o'clock game from Raleigh for the Tar Heels. And look, we're not going to get into the whole gist of what Roy Williams has done against NC State. Everyone knows what he's done against the Wolfpack. But, State comes in. They come in with a 4-1 record, albeit that one loss. Not very pretty. But this is I'm going to say an average basketball team that this game means more to them than it means to Carolina on the surface, because they view us as their biggest rival, whereas Duke is our biggest rival. And they've got some guys that have given Carolina some problems in the past, most notably Devin Daniels, who's averaging 16 points per game, Braxton Beverly, who's averaging 8 points per game, DJ Funderburk, who's averaging 8 points a game. So they've got some pieces to give Carolina some trouble. What do you think about this game as Carolina gets ready to go to Raleigh to open up ACC play?
I think it's a pretty solid recipe for you to go in and have success out of the gate. I know we don't want to talk about it, but Roy Williams' success against NC State is probably one of the more, what am I looking for here? Shocking marks if you're outside of these two fan bases nationally, with just how much success he has had against them. But there's some other interesting factors in this game. This is, as you mentioned, this is an ACC opener. It's pretty rare that you're going to face a rival in the ACC opener. I understand that, this rivalry game is seen as more of a rivalry for NC State. I think in recent years, though, as well, Carolina has definitely turned it up in these games. You look at the games last year; those were games that Carolina could have easily just rolled over and lost. That was a chance for them to come out, get some big wins last year. We thought both times that Carolina won those games that was going to potentially turn the season around at the time. But they don't have to play with that much urgency this year. But they still should. I think there'll be guys that'll come out and play, with a lot of urgency in this game. Primarily, some of the guys that have been here for a while. The other interesting storyline in this one is Garrison Brooks actually the label that we gave him last year, the next NC State killer? We've seen guys like Luke May who have just absolutely destroyed NC State every time they played him. Same thing with Marcus Page. Last year, Garrison Brooks absolutely destroyed NC State in both games that they played. Can he do it again this year and keep that mantra? I think there's a good chance that he can.